She was just the janitor-faded coveralls, a mop bucket with a squeaky wheel, and a stare that never met anyone's eyes. Recruits joked about her. The instructors ignored her. Until a sniper's weapon jammed, and she fixed it without a word. Then, during a live fire sim, targets dropped from impossible angles without a single sniper accounted for. One by one, heads turned, and when she finally spoke from the catwalk, her words corrected a shot that even the range master couldn't explain. Turns out, the ghost cleaning the floors used to train the ghosts no one dared talk about. If this gave you chills, subscribe now for more stories the world was never supposed to hear. The mop bucket had one bad wheel. You heard it before you saw her, that high-pitched squeak ricocheting down the corridor like a warning nobody paid attention to. Fort Granger's weapons testing wing didn't sleep much, but it was especially alive at 630. Boots thudded, targets clanged, jokes bounced off cinder-block walls. But that wheel cut through all of it, consistent, metallic, stubborn. Reagan Yates moved with it. Coveralls faded to an almost permanent gray, knees scuffed smooth, name patch unreadable. Her hair was pulled back in a short, practical twist that didn't quite hide the silver running through it. No makeup, no jewelry. Just a cleaning rag tucked into her belt loop and eyes that watched everything without drawing attention. Nobody paid her much mind. The younger ones barely saw her. Maintenance contract, civilian, background. She moved through the corridor, like part of the infrastructure, predictable, unimportant. Something you sidestep without thought. Her bucket rolled along beside her, the mop handle held with both hands like it was a walking stick and a weapon, depending on the angle. She stopped near Bay 6, just before the range doors. Concrete marked with faint boot stains and 2 drops of what looked like CLP oil. She didn't sigh or roll her eyes. Just adjusted her grip, dipped the mop, wrung it out with 2 fluid pulls, and moved forward with the same rhythm as always. 2 strokes forward, 1 back. Pivot. Repeat. Recruits moved around her, loud and loose. A few brushed past, too close. She didn't flinch. One of them, a wiry, sharp-tongued sniper trainee named Hart, made a joke as he passed. Something about the geriatrics ward getting lost. It earned him a laugh from his buddies and a raised eyebrow from his instructor. Reagan didn't react. She was watching the way he held his range bag, left hand too high, shoulders out of alignment. Not her business. Not anymore. But she noticed. That was the thing. She always noticed. No one saw it yet. But someone would. Because when a woman walks through a room like she's charting wind currents and blind spots instead of dirt stains, eventually somebody stops laughing long enough to wonder why. The long tables in the weapons bay were cluttered with field-stripped rifles, bore snakes, and half-drunk energy drinks. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, like impatient insects, casting sharp white reflections off oiled steel. The early crew of junior snipers had just finished their maintenance checks and were slipping into that strange pocket of time between official tasks and unsupervised boredom. Private First Class Nolan Hart leaned against a rack of disassembled M2010s, one boot up on the frame, arms crossed like he owned the air around him. Sharp-featured, hair trimmed just enough to meet regs, and a permanent smirk carved into his face. He was good, everyone said so. Natural eye, steady hands, first in his class back at Pendleton. But he liked the sound of his own voice too much. Reagan Yates was at the far end of the bay, running the mop along the drainage groove that cut through the middle of the floor. Her bucket squeaked every few steps, announcing her presence like clockwork. "Yo, heads up," one of the snipers said, nodding toward her. "The scenery's moving." Another one grinned. "Think she came with the building? Like issued with the concrete? Bet she's older than half the gear in here," someone else offered. "I mean, mop with legs, right?" A few laughs. Not cruel. Not yet. Then Hart stepped forward, twirling a carbon scraper between his fingers. "Nah," he said, louder than necessary. She's just here to remind us what failure looks like. Couldn't hit a barn wall with a grenade, so now she gets to mop up after the ones who can. The laughter stopped halfway out of my throat. Not because anyone was shocked, but because the tone had shifted. Just enough. Reagan didn't look up, didn't say a word. But, as she turned the mop toward the rack where Hart stood, she paused for a heartbeat. Just one. Her eyes flicked to the long gun propped against the back rail Hart's weapon. The bolt wasn't fully seated. The safety was engaged wrong. She didn't fix it, didn't speak. Just let her gaze land, hold, then move on. A second later she was mopping again. Same rhythm, same sound. But Hart had seen it. The glance, the hesitation, and suddenly the room didn't feel quite as funny. The jam sounded wrong the moment it happened, not loud, not catastrophic. Just a muted, metallic click-thunk that didn't belong. The kind of sound that meant something wasn't seated right, something was off. The two armorers working the bench leaned in, frowning at the suppressed Mayan 2010 laid out between them like a patient in mid-surgery. Bolt stuck, one muttered, trying to rock it back with a little too much force. Feels like it's bound at the lug. Maybe a burr or misaligned extractor. The other flipped open a laminated maintenance manual, tracing the troubleshooting diagram with a grease-stained glove. Could be the detent, or the guide rail. Pull the whole upper and... The mop bucket rolled closer behind them. Squeaky wheel, right on schedule. Neither tech turned around. Reagan Yates had been working the corridor behind Bay 2 all morning, silent as steam. She stopped 10 feet back, watching. Not long, just a glance. Long enough to see their hands move in the wrong order, eyes skipping the obvious. The rifle wasn't broken. It was misunderstood. She stepped forward without invitation. The tech with the manual started to say something, maybe a warning, maybe a question, but her hands were already in motion. One gloved palm braced the receiver. The other lifted the bolt handle, twisted with a precise quarter turn that didn't come from guessing. She pressed inward, not hard, but exactly where the play was, then back. There was a quiet click, a shift, and the bolt slid open like a drawer in a well-built desk. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, just handed the rifle back, with a nod that said, "Now it works." The tech stared at it, then at her. What'd you?" one began. She was already walking away, mop sloshing, bucket squealing. Same rhythm. 2 strokes forward, 1 back, pivot, repeat. The younger tech turned to the other. "Did you see what she just—" "Yeah," the older one said quietly, "but I don't think we're supposed to ask." Behind them, the rifle sat whole and quiet again, and the janitor nobody looked twice at had just solved a problem they didn't know how to name. The Fort Granger long-range range sat on the far edge of the training grounds, carved into flat brushland and silence. No cover, no distractions. Just the wind, the scope, the trigger, and whether or not you could tell the difference between discipline and luck. Private First Class Nolan Hart lay prone on mat 7, cheek pressed to the comb of his M2010, fingers light on the trigger. He'd fired 4 rounds. Clean grouping, but all of them drifted 2 inches right. Consistently. No gusts. No visible deflection. Just enough error to turn precision into noise. He muttered something under his breath, rolled his shoulder, reset his stance. A senior instructor behind him adjusted his hat. "You're breathing with your ego again," he said flatly. "Quit muscling the rifle and trust the platform." Hart didn't answer, just gritted his jaw and sighted in again. Up on the catwalk above the firing line, a slow-moving silhouette passed behind the observation glass. Mop. Bucket. That familiar, stubborn squeak. Reagan Yates. She wasn't supposed to be there, technically, but nobody told her not to be. And she had clearance to clean every surface in the facility, including the catwalks. which meant she had a view of the flag indicators, and the shooters, and the shots. Heart reset, fired again. Another 2 inches right. He exhaled hard, more frustration than technique. Then a voice floated down from the catwalk, quiet but clear, like it didn't care if it was heard, but didn't mind if it was. "Your rear elbow's lifting," Reagan said. "You're compensating without realizing it." Hart froze. The instructor blinked. "What?" Reagan didn't repeat herself. She kept walking, mop squeaking rhythmically. She didn't look down at them, just kept her eyes on the row of wind flags flaring slightly left at 600, flat beyond 800. Hart looked over his shoulder, just enough to catch her shadow disappearing behind a concrete pillar. He adjusted, dropped his elbow back to earth, relaxed his grip. He fired. The round landed dead center. No one said anything, but the instructor took off his hat, scratched the back of his head, and muttered, "Well, damn." No rank, no badge, no title. But somehow, the woman with the mop knew exactly what he didn't. The range after dark was a different animal quieter, heavier somehow. Like the dirt itself remembered every shot fired that day and refused to let the echo die easily. Floodlights buzzed softly overhead, casting long shadows that made the shooting lanes look like something out of a dream or a memory. Hart stood just outside the fence line, arms folded, rifle case slung over one shoulder, eyes fixed on the horizon like it owed him something. He'd been there for 10 minutes, maybe more, waiting, not sure what he'd say if she actually showed, not sure why he was there at all, if he was being honest. Just that something had shifted after her voice drifted down from that catwalk, and his next shot found dead center like it had been waiting for permission. He heard the bucket before he saw her same squeaky wheel, same rhythm. She came around the side of the admin building, not in a hurry, not surprised to see him. Like she knew. Of course she knew. Reagan stopped just short of the gate, hands resting lightly on the mop handle. Not defensive, just still. Hart straightened a little, cleared his throat. "Ma'am." The word felt foreign coming out of his mouth. He wasn't used to using it without sarcasm or authority behind it. But this was neither. This was something else. "Would you?" He hesitated. Then just let it out, low and honest. "Would you teach me?" Reagan studied him, not with pity, not with judgment. Just measured the shape of the question he was really asking. He wasn't after tricks or secrets. He was chasing something else. Understanding, maybe, or clarity. She nodded. Once. Clean and simple. "Not how to shoot," she said quietly. "How to see." Hart blinked. "See what?" Reagan looked past him, out toward the far edge of the range where shadows melted into tree lines and wind cut low across the open dirt. "Everything they trained you to ignore." Then she turned, walked back toward the operations shed, and didn't look back. Hart stood there for a while longer, long enough to realize she'd already started teaching him. They never stepped onto the range. Not once. Reagan didn't believe in shooting lanes. Too clean, too sterile, too symmetrical. Real fights didn't happen on flat lines with painted numbers and wind flags to warn you what was coming. They happened in the shadows, at awkward angles, in silence so thick it pressed against your chest like a second heart. So she took Hart to the perimeter road. It wasn't much. A gravel path that looped behind the hangars and weapons bays, lined with power junctions, overgrown grass, rusted utility trailers, and busted fence posts. Maintenance didn't bother with it much. That made it perfect. The first lesson was walking. "Your feet are wrong," she said, not unkindly. "You walk like a man who's used to being heard." Hart frowned, looked down. "I walk like a Marine." Reagan tilted her head. "That's part of the problem." She showed him how to roll his foot, heel to toe, how to feel the terrain shift under him, not conquer it. Gravel under boot could sing or whisper depended on pressure, pacing, purpose. She made him walk blindfolded, feeling for subtle grades in the earth. At first he stumbled, always a half step too fast, always assuming his body knew better than the ground. She said nothing when he got it wrong. Just reset him and let him try again. The second lesson was breathing. Not the shallow, tactical breaths he'd practiced since boot. Not the precision inhale, count, exhale of the sniper field manual. This was older, quieter. The kind of breathing that belonged to people who disappeared before anyone knew to look. She made him sit with the rifle across his lap, just listening to the wind slide past the fence line. 5 breaths per minute. No noise, no tension, just rhythm. You don't control the shot, she said. You meet it. By the third day, she gave him 5-centimeter steel discs and a blindfold. Nailed them to old fence posts. Nothing to see. Just instinct. Just body memory. He hit the first one on the 4th try, the second on the 3rd. And on the 5th morning, when the light broke soft across the tarmac, Hart hit 4 in a row. No sight. No breath wasted. Reagan didn't applaud, just nodded once. Lesson absorbed, not yet complete, but the silence between them had started to sound like respect. By the end of the week, the whispers had outpaced the mop. Recruits noticed first Hart walking straighter, quieter, not with cockiness, but purpose. The kind you earn when someone hands you a truth nobody else got. Then, a tech caught him striking targets at odd angles, low shots. Elevation offsets, wind-adjusted body rolls. Off-range, off-script. Someone asked where he learned it. He didn't answer. That only made it worse. By Thursday, instructors started watching. Not overtly, not with clipboards or questions, just watching. The way you might observe a storm you didn't see coming but couldn't quite explain. And always, always just before Hart hit a new threshold there she was. Reagan Yates. Mop in hand, bucket trailing, moving along the periphery like nothing was happening at all. Except it was. So someone asked. Staff Sergeant Marlowe, a range instructor, 20 years in, spine-like rebar, walked into the armory and asked the question that broke the surface tension. Who is she? Who? The quartermaster replied, flipping through sign-out logs. The cleaner, Marlowe said. The older woman, gray hair, never speak. Fixes malfunctions without touching tools. That one. The quartermaster checked the clipboard, frowned. Facilities. Civilian contract. Yates. No first name listed. Got a file? The system was slow. Government issue slow. But eventually, a profile loaded. Marlowe squinted at the screen. Basic data. Hired, 2022. Cherry Point transfer. Civilian background check. Low-level facility clearance. And then he scrolled. The notes section was nearly empty. Just a single line. Prior service record. Classified. Red cell. V. Access denied. Marlowe froze. His hand hovered over the keyboard like he'd touched something electric. He'd heard of red cell. Everyone in operations had at least the whispers. Ghost units spun off from Tier 1 wargames back in the 80s. Special threat simulations. Breach and evasion. Counter-extraction. They were the monsters the Navy used to test its own security. And Red Cell V? That wasn't a simulation team. That was active. And if this woman, this janitor, was part of that designation? He closed the file without printing. Didn't talk about it. Didn't write it down. Just stared out the armory window as Reagan's mop bucket squeaked by in the distance. She didn't look up. She never did. But now, he watched her like she was something radioactive. Because maybe she was. The briefing was quick. No names. No prep. Just a folded map, a loadout, and a hushed warning. Extraction sim. Unknown overwatch. Expect contact. Move like it matters. It was just after 2,200 when Hart and the three others hit the tree line south of the ammo depot, boots crunching frost-laced brush, NVGs calibrated tight. No moon, no stars. Just black sky and tension. The kind that wraps around your spine and makes your breath feel louder than it is. They moved in staggered formation, slow and sharp, like they'd been trained. Hart led on point. The others fanned out, sweeping arcs. Nothing fancy, just muscle memory and gut. But something was off. Too quiet. Too easy. Then the first shot rang out. Not close. Distant. Suppressed. Clean. One of the silhouette targets guarding the simulated extraction site dropped so fast it looked like the wind had taken it. Then another. Then two in quick succession, from different angles. Hart hit cover behind a stack of pallets and scanned the ridge. No flash, no glint, no shape, just echo. The other three froze. They hadn't fired a single round, but the targets were falling, one by one, with surgical precision. "Who the hell is on glass?" one of the instructors whispered through the comms, voice tight with confusion. "That's not part of the op." Nobody answered. Nobody could. Within 5 minutes, the kill zone was clear. Hart and his team made the extraction point untouched. By 2,300, the instructors were still debating it under red lights in the ops trailer. None of their snipers had been deployed. None of the drones had active optics. No recorded heat sigs from the perch sectors. Just clean drops. Timed shots. Wind adjusted. Dead center. The next morning, Reagan Yates showed up at 545 like always. Same mop, same bucket, same rhythm. But her boots were dusty. Not hangar dust, field dust, the kind that stuck to tread from brushland and bark mulch. The kind you only picked up from the edge of the tree line. Nobody said anything. Not to her. Not about it. But the instructors kept glancing out toward the south ridge all day, like maybe, just maybe, the wind hadn't lied. Hart found her near the northeast washdown pit, where concrete met rust, and the sky always looked too wide. She was alone, as usual, mop in one hand, wringing out gray water into the drain with slow, practiced turns. The morning shift had already passed her twice without saying a word. They didn't joke anymore. Not since the extraction sim. Hart stood just inside her periphery, hands in his pockets, boots scuffing gravel like he hadn't made up his mind yet. But his voice, when it came, was steady. "I checked your patch." Reagan didn't stop ringing. "Just wait." "Red Cell V was a myth," he said. "Ghost unit. No record, no command logs, not even whispers at Quantico. They said it never existed." She let go of the mop handle. The water stilled. Only then did she turn to face him. "We were supposed to be," she said. "Not defensive, not proud, just flat, like reading from a page that no longer mattered." Hart watched her face for some sing denial, maybe, or the kind of smirk people wear when they've been caught exaggerating. He found neither. "I don't understand," he said. "You mop floors. You fix jammed rifles. You show up like a ghost and make bullets land like sermons, but you're not just a janitor." "No," Reagan said quietly. "I'm not." She reached into the bottom pouch of her cleaning cart, past folded rags and a sealed box of bleach tablets, and pulled something wrapped in a torn utility cloth. Carefully, she unwrapped it, exposing a long discontinued sniper optic. Scratched housing, dented turrets, military issue, but custom modified. One side bore faint, hand-etched initials, REY. The other, 94, Bosnia. Hart leaned closer, breath caught halfway up his throat. He recognized the make. It hadn't been issued in over 2 decades. Only people who'd been there would still have one. Only people who had done things. This was mounted on a Dragunov. she said, running her thumb along the cracked lens hood. Neutral zone. Operation False Mercy. We weren't supposed to be there either. She didn't offer it to him, didn't ask for silence. She just wrapped it back up and returned it to the cart like it was nothing more than an old rag. And for a long time after she walked away, Hart just stood there trying to reconcile a mop bucket with a legend. By Friday morning, no one crossed her path without looking first. Not because they were afraid. That wasn't it. Reagan Yates didn't move like someone who demanded space. She moved like someone who already owned it. And once you realized that, stepping aside wasn't politeness. It was instinct. The range crews didn't joke anymore. Not about her. Not about the mop. Not about the age lines on her face or the wheel that squeaked like a tired violin. The mop still squeaked, but the sound had changed. Where it used to be background noise, now it felt like punctuation, something that marked the beginning and end of every conversation she walked through. One of the newer recruits, barely 19, still growing into his uniform, saw her reposition a fuse box that had been sitting half loose behind Bay 4. She didn't call attention to it, just saw it. Fixed it. Moved on. The kid watched her for 10 minutes after that. Didn't say a word. Hart passed her near the water station, nodded once. Not a smile. Just a nod that said, "I see you now." She returned it with a barely perceptible dip of the chin. Mutual understanding. Mission complete. By lunch, a piece of duct tape appeared on the side of her mop bucket. It wasn't from her. Someone else had placed it there. Pressed clean. Centered. A folded index card beneath the tape. 6 words, block print. "Thank you for showing us the aim." She found it during her post-lunch walkthrough. Paused. Read it once. Said nothing. Just peeled it off gently, folded it smaller, and slid it into her front pocket next to the cloth she used to clean optics no one had seen her use, but everyone knew she had. She didn't display it, didn't talk about it, but that night, alone in the storage closet where she kept her gear, she tucked the note inside an old ammo box she'd repurposed to hold what little mattered. No medals, no paperwork, just quiet things that meant something to people who understood. And when she closed the lid, it made a sound like the end of a chapter. Not a conclusion. Just closure.